Hey little buddies, it's Uncle Rick from the Uncle Rick Audio Book Club. Today, for our podcast, we have a section from the life of General Thomas J. Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, one of my personal heroes. And we're reading a chapter entitled A Confederate Colonel. Before going on with the life of our hero, I must tell you in a few plain and truthful words the causes of the Civil War which in 1861 broke out between the states. You remember that after the Revolutionary War, the 13 colonies agreed to form a union and adopted a set of laws called the Constitution of the United States. From the very first, however, the states did not agree. In fact, laws which suited one section did not suit the other, so that there was always some cause for a quarrel. At last, the question of slavery seemed to give the most trouble. You've been told that African slaves were first brought to Virginia in 1619 by the Dutch, and that afterwards English and northern traders brought others, until all the colonies held slaves. But the cold climate of the north did not suit the Negroes, who had been used to the hot sun of Africa. So, by degrees, they were sold to southern planters. Many influential men, north and south, wished to see the slaves freed, but as the slaves increased in the south, southern men saw that a rapid abolition of slavery would be disastrous to both whites and blacks because the Negroes were not ready for it. And what they mean by that is that whereas the abolitionists wanted to set the slaves free immediately and give them full citizenship, including the right to vote, the Southerners understood that the slaves had not been taught to read and write for the most part, and they would have a very hard time surviving, let alone voting wisely, if they were suddenly given freedom and the right to vote. And so some people advanced different plans for abolishing slavery gradually, which would have made more sense. There never should have been a civil war. But there was. The South lost. The slaves were freed suddenly, and it created all kinds of problems for the slaves as well as other people. You can read about that under the topic of Reconstruction. One of the problems with the slaves' lack of education is that they could be cheated. Without owners to take care of them, they were put out to work for anybody they could find a job with. And Booker T. Washington, who was a slave boy at the time of the Civil War, had a stepfather who left after the war and went to Malden, West Virginia to work in a salt mine. And he was regularly cheated out of his wages because he didn't understand arithmetic. He couldn't do math. And so his employers were able to give him less money than he had earned, which is a terrible thing. So we needed a better plan than that. The North insisted that the slaves should not be brought into the new states as they came into the Union. The South demanded that a slaveholder should be free to carry his slaves from one state into another. Many Southern people also believed that the Negroes were the happiest and best cared for working people in the world, and that the North was trespassing upon the South's just rights. All the slaves weren't treated kindly, of course. They weren't treated the same. Some people treated their slaves well, just like people that have employees do now. And a few were cruel to them. Terrible, terrible thing. So the quarrel went on until October 1859, when an event happened in Virginia which greatly increased the hatred of both parties. A man named John Brown laid a plot for freeing the Negroes, first in Virginia and then in the whole South. For 2 years he sent men through the South secretly to stir up the Negroes and incite them to kill the whites. He bought long iron pikes for the Negroes to fight with, as they did not know how to use firearms. When he thought that all was ready, he entered Harper's Ferry by night, with only 18 men, and seized the United States Arsenal there. An arsenal is a place where weapons are stored. Sending out armed men into the country to capture the principal slave owners and to call upon the slaves to join him. This was done secretly during the night, and the next morning every white man who left his home was seized and imprisoned in an engine house near the arsenal. Only a few Negroes came in, and they were too much scared to aid in the deadly and dastardly work. As soon as the news of this raid spread over the country, angry men came into town from all sides, and before night John Brown and his men were shut up in the engine house. Soon a band of Marines under the command of Colonel R.E. Lee was sent out from Washington by the government, and as John Brown would not surrender, the soldiers at once stormed the engine house. 10 of John Brown's men were killed by the soldiers, and all the rest, including Brown himself, were wounded. 6 of the storming party were killed and 9 wounded. John Brown and 7 of his men were brought to trial at Charlestown, Virginia, and being found guilty of treason, were hanged. The cadets of the Virginia Military Institute were ordered to Charlestown to protect the officers of the law. Major Jackson commanded a section of light artillery accompanying the battalion and was present at the death of Brown. He afterwards gave his friends a graphic account of this dreadful scene. This event cast great gloom over the country. Many persons in the North thought that John Brown had died a martyr to the cause of slavery, while the people at the South saw that they could no longer enjoy in peace and safety the rights granted to them by the Constitution. Major Jackson was truly Southern in feeling. He believed in the rights of states, and also that the South ought to take her stand and resent all efforts to coerce and crush her. However, he dreaded war and thought it the duty of Christians throughout the land to pray for peace. A month before South Carolina went out of the Union, Major Jackson called upon his pastor, Dr. White, and said, "It is painful to know how carelessly they speak of war. If the government insists upon the measures now threatened, there must be war. They seem not to know what its horrors are. Let us have meetings to pray for peace." Dr. White agreed to this request, and the burden of Major Jackson's prayer was that God would preserve the land from war. After the election of Mr. Lincoln in November 1860 to be President of the United States, the Southern states saw no hope of getting their rights and resolved to secede or withdraw from the Union of the States. South Carolina took the lead and seceded on the 20th of December, 1860. She was quickly followed by Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. On the 9th of January, 1861, these states united, and at Montgomery in Alabama formed a government called the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as president. Virginia was slow to withdraw from the Union formed by the states, but when President Lincoln called for 75,000 soldiers to invade the southern states, she delayed no longer. On April 17, 1861, she seceded and began to prepare for war. "In 1 week," says Dabney, "the whole state was changed into a camp. The sons of Virginia rushed to arms, and soon the city of Richmond was filled with men drilling and preparing to fight." At daybreak on Sunday morning, April 21, 1861, an order came to Lexington from the governor of the state, Mr. Letcher, to march the cadets that day to Richmond. As the senior officers were already in Richmond, Major Jackson at once prepared to go forward with his corps. At 11 o'clock a.m., he went to his home to say goodbye to his wife. They retired to their own room, where he read the 5th chapter of 2 Corinthians, which begins with these beautiful words: "For we know, if our earthly house of this tabernacle be dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." He then knelt and prayed for themselves and for their dear country, imploring God that it might be His holy will to avert war and bloodshed. He then said goodbye to his wife and left his dear home, never more to return to it. After a few days, his wife went to live at the home of a friend. His house was closed. Major Jackson and the cadets marched forward to Stanton, whence they went by train to Richmond, and at once went into camp on the fairgrounds. From Richmond, Major Jackson wrote thus to his wife: "Colonel Lee of the Army is here, and has been made Major General of the Virginia troops. I regard him a better officer than General Scott." After a few days, on April 21st, Major Jackson was made colonel of the Virginia forces and ordered to take command at Harper's Ferry, a town on the Potomac River where the United States governments had had a great number of workshops and firearms. This important place had already been captured by Virginia troops, and it was necessary to hold it until the arms and machinery could be moved away. Just here it may be well to give you a word picture of our hero as he began a career which was to fill the world with his fame. Jackson was tall and very erect, with large hands and feet. His brow was fair and broad. His eyes were blue, placid, and clear when their owner was calm, but dark and flashing when he was aroused. His nose was Roman, his chin covered with a brown beard. His mouth was firm. His step was long and rapid, and if he was not a graceful rider, he was a fearless one. In battle or as he rode along his columns, hat in hand, bowing right and left to his soldiers, whose shouts arose on high, no figure could be nobler than his. Few, even of his intimate friends, were conscious of his military genius, and so he burst upon the world as a meteor darts across a starlit sky. On his way to Harper's Ferry, he wrote thus to his dear wife. Winchester, April 29th, 1861. I expect to leave here about 2 p.m. today for Harper's Ferry. I am thankful to say that an ever kind of Providence, who causes all things to work together for good to them that love him, has given me the post which I prefer above all others. To his name be all the praise. You must not expect to hear from me very often, as I shall have more work than I have ever had in the same time before. But don't be troubled about me, as an ever-kind Heavenly Father will give me all needful aid. This letter, says a friend, gives a true idea of his character. He feels within himself the genius and power which make him long to have a separate command, but he also feels the need of resting upon his Heavenly Father for aid and support. Colonel Jackson had been ordered by Major General Lee to organize and drill the men who had gathered at Harper's Ferry and to hold the place as long as possible against the foe. He went to work with great zeal, and aided by Colonel Maury and Major Preston, soon had the men organized into companies and regiments. As Colonel Jackson was known to have been a brave soldier in the Mexican War, he was readily obeyed by the soldiers in his little army, which soon numbered 4,500 men. But on the 2nd of May, Virginia joined the Southern Confederacy and handed over all her soldiers to that government, which bound itself in return to defend Virginia and to pay her troops. General Joseph E. Johnston was sent on the 23rd of May by the Confederate government to take command at Harper's Ferry, and Colonel Jackson at once gave up his trust to General Johnston. The Virginia regiments at that place, the 2nd, the 4th, the 5th, the 27th, and a little after, the 33rd, with Pendleton's battery of light field guns, were now organized into a brigade, of which Jackson was made the commander. This made the brigade which was afterwards famous as the Stonewall Brigade, and which we shall see did much hard fighting and was to the Southern Army what the 10th Legion was to the great Caesar. General Johnston soon found out that he could not hold Harper's Ferry against the foe which was now coming up under General Patterson. He therefore burned the great railroad bridge over the Potomac River at Harper's Ferry and moved away all his guns and stores. Then on Sunday, June 16th, he withdrew his little army to Bunker Hill, a place about 12 miles from the city of Winchester. That is not the Bunker Hill that you've heard of. The battle in the Revolutionary War was at Bunker Hill in Massachusetts, just outside Boston. There he offered battle to General Patterson, but the latter refused to fight and withdrew to the north bank of the Potomac. On June 19th, Colonel Jackson was ordered to march northward and watch the foe, who was again crossing the river. He was also ordered to destroy the engines and cars of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad at Martinsburg. This he did, though he writes of it in the following words: "It was sad work, but I had my orders and my duty was to obey." Until July 2nd, Colonel Jackson with his brigade remained a little north of Martinsburg, having in his front Colonel J.E.B. Stuart with a regiment of cavalry. On that day, General Patterson advanced to meet Jackson, who went forward with only one regiment, the 5th Virginia, a few companies of cavalry, and one light field piece. A sharp skirmish ensued. At last, the foe coming up in large numbers, Jackson fell back to the main body of his troops after having taken 45 prisoners and killed and wounded a large number of the enemy. Jackson's loss was only 2 men killed and 10 wounded. In this battle, which is known as the Battle of Haines Farm, Colonel Jackson was no doubt the only man in the infantry who had ever been under fire, but they all behaved with the greatest coolness and bravery. Jackson in this first battle showed such boldness and at the same time such care for the lives of his men that he at once gained a hold upon their esteem. General Patterson now held Martinsburg, while General Johnston, having come up with the whole army, offered him battle each day. But Patterson had other plans and soon moved away. While General Johnston was at Winchester watching his movements, Colonel Jackson received this note. Richmond, July 3rd, 61. My dear General, I have the pleasure of sending you a commission of Brigadier General in the Provisional Army, and to feel that you merit it. May your advancement increase your usefulness to the state. Very truly, Robert E. Lee. General Jackson, for so we must now call him, was much pleased at this promotion, and wrote to his wife thus, Through the blessing of God, I have now all that I ought to wish in the line of promotion. May his blessing rest on you, is my fervent prayer. During the spring of 1861, the states of North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas also left the Union and joined the new Confederacy, the capital of which was now Richmond, Virginia. The great object of the North was to capture Richmond. For this they raised 4 large armies to invade Virginia. The first was to go by way of Fortress Monroe, the second by way of Manassas. The third was to march up the Shenandoah Valley, and the fourth was to come from the northwest. Now the Confederate army was much smaller than the Federal army because the southern states were thinly settled, while the North contained very many large cities and had the world from which to draw supplies of men as well as munitions of war. The North also was rich because it had the treasury of the United States, while the South was poor in both money and arms, and had the outside world closed against her. So the Confederate leaders had to use great skill in meeting such large armies with so few men. You remember that in the last chapter I told how General Johnston at Winchester, with a small force, was watching General Patterson. Now, just across the mountains, 60 miles southeast at Manassas, Beauregard, another famous Southern general, was facing a large Northern army under General McDowell. This army was 35,000 strong, while the Confederates had only 28,000 men. General McDowell's army was composed of the best soldiers in the northern states, and they had splendid firearms, artillery, uniforms, and tents. In fact, all that money could buy to make them do good service in the field. On the other hand, the Confederates were poorly clad and had old muskets and cannon. Many of the cavalry had only the shotguns which they used for shooting in their boyhood days. The North fully expected that this fine army would crush the Confederates at one blow, and when General McDowell was a little slow in marching forward to battle, they began to cry, "On to Richmond!" Large crowds of idlers, editors, reporters, members of Congress, government officials, and even ladies went from Washington to the rear of the Federal Army in order to witness the defeat of the Confederates. General Beauregard now sent word to General Johnston to leave Patterson and come across the mountains to his aid. General Johnston at once sent Colonel Stewart with his cavalry to face Patterson and to try to keep him from finding out that Johnston had left Winchester and had gone to the help of Beauregard. This order Stewart obeyed so well that Johnston was at Manassas 60 miles away before Patterson discovered the trick. General Johnston's army set out from Winchester on the forenoon of Thursday, July 18th. The 1st Virginia Brigade, led by General Jackson, headed the line of march. As they passed through the streets of Winchester, the people asked with sad faces if they were going to hand them over to the foe. The soldiers, for reply, said that they knew not where or for what purpose they were marching southeast. But when they had marched about 3 miles, General Johnston called a halt, and an order was read to them explaining that they were going to Beauregard, who was then on the eve of a great battle with McDowell. The general hoped that his troops would act like men and save their country. At these words the men rent the air with their shouts and went forward at the double quick, waded the Shenandoah River, which was waist deep, crossed the Blue Ridge Mountains at Ashby's Gap, and some hours after night paused to rest for a while at the village of Paris on the eastern slope of the mountains. Dr. Dabney tells us that here, while the men slept, Jackson himself kept watch, saying, "Let the poor fellows sleep. I'll guard the camp myself." For 2 hours he paced up and down under the trees or sat on the fence. At last, an hour before daybreak, he gave up his watch to a member of his staff, and rolling himself upon the grass in a fence corner, was soon fast asleep. At peep of day the brigade was up and away, and by dusk on July 19th, The whole command, dusty, hungry, and footsore, marched into an old pine field near Manassas, where they spent Saturday in resting for the coming battle. The Confederate lines stretched for 8 miles along the southern bank of Bull Run, which could be forded at several places. At these fords, General Beauregard had placed large bodies of men. On July 18th, before Jackson had come up, General McDowell had tried to take these fords, but his troops had been driven back. He then made a plan to march a part of his forces around the Confederates' left wing at a certain stone bridge and to get in their rear. Being thus between two large forces, the Confederates would be crushed or forced to surrender. On Sunday morning, July 21st, General McDowell sent forward a portion of his troops to the stone bridge, which was guarded at that time by the gallant Colonel Evans, with only 1,100 men. After he had fought desperately for several hours, and just as he was outflanked and sorely beset, Generals Bee and Bartow came up to his aid, and for a while turned the tide of battle. At last, however, the Confederates were slowly forced back by the larger numbers. At this moment, General Jackson reached the spot with his brigade of 2,600 men. These he quickly placed on the crest of a ridge in the edge of a pine thicket, and before them posted 17 cannon. Generals Bee and Bartow and Colonel Evans rallied their broken lines on the right, while on the left were a few regiments of Virginia and Carolina troops. The whole force numbered about 6,500 men. The infantry of his brigade were ordered by Jackson to lie down behind the artillery to escape the fire of the enemy, who were now coming across the valley and up the hill with 20,000 men and 24 cannon. Just then, Generals Johnston and Beauregard galloped to the front and cheered the men on in every part of the field. From 11 o'clock a.m. until 3 o'clock p.m., the artillery shook the earth with its dreadful roar, and thousands of musket balls whizzed through the air, black with the smoke of battle. While the artillery fight was going on, General Jackson rode back and forth between the guns and his regiments, lying prone upon the ground in the burning sun, and greatly tried by bursting shell and grape shot. His erect form and blazing eyes brought hope and courage to them, in this their first baptism of fire. At last, General Bee, seeing his thin ranks begin to waver, said, "General, they are beating us back." "Then," said Jackson, "we will give them the bayonet." Bee, catching the spirit of Jackson, galloped back to his men, saying, "There's Jackson, standing like a stone wall. Rally behind the Virginians." A few score of the men rallied around the gallant Bee and charged upon the foe. In a few moments the brave Bee fell dead with his face to the foe. From that time, says Draper, an historian of the North, the name which Jackson had received in a baptism of fire replaced that which he had received in a baptism of water, and he was known ever after as Stonewall Jackson. Both of Jackson's flanks were now in danger, and he saw that the moment had come to use the bayonet. Wheeling his cannon to right and left, he gave the signal to his men to rise, and cried out to the 2nd Regiment, "Reserve your fire until they come within 50 yards. Then fire and give them the bayonet, and when you charge, yell like furies." His men sprang to their feet, fired one deadly volley, and then dashed down upon the foe. The latter could not stand this dreadful onset, but turned and fled. A battery which had been captured by the foe was retaken, and the center of the enemy's line of battle was pierced by Jackson's men. For 4 hours Jackson had kept the enemy at bay, but now help was near at hand. Just as the Federals had rallied and again advanced in large numbers, General Kirby Smith, with a body of men which had just come from the valley, and Generals Early and Holmes, with reserve troops, hurried up and struck the right wing of the Federal army, while the Confederates in the center turned against them their own guns. This onset proved too much for the Federals. They again fled, and this time their retreat became a general rout. The men in terror cast away their guns, and leaving cannon and flags, rushed for the nearest fords of Bull Run. The Confederate cavalry pursued them, while Kemper's field battery plowed them through and through with shells. The road to Washington was one surging mass of human beings struggling to get away from that dreadful field of death. General Jackson's troops took no part in the pursuit except to plant a battery and fire at the fleeing foe, many of whom did not stop until they were safe across the long bridge at Washington. Though the Confederates were the victors, they had lost many brave men. Generals B and Bartow were killed, and General Kirby Smith was badly wounded. General Jackson had been wounded in his left hand early in the action, but had taken no notice of it. Now that the battle was over, he felt the pain acutely and went to the field hospital, which had been placed by the side of a brook beneath the shade of some friendly willow trees. When he came up, his friend Dr. McGuire said, "General, are you much hurt?" "No," replied he, "I believe it's a trifle." "How goes the day?" asked the doctor. "Oh," exclaimed Jackson, "we have beaten them. We've gained a glorious victory." Dr. Dabney says that this was the only time that Jackson was ever heard to express joy at having gained the day. When the surgeons came around him to dress his wounded hand, he said, "No, I can wait. My wound is but a trifle. Attend first to those poor fellows." He then sat down upon the grass and waited until the wounds of the badly hurt had been dressed. At first it was thought that his middle finger would have to be cut off, but Dr. McGuire, having dressed it very skillfully, it was saved, and his hand at length healed. It is stated by several friends that General Jackson said, while having his hand dressed, that with 10,000 fresh troops he believed that he could go into Washington City. However, as he was not the commanding general, he could not make the attempt, but could only do as he was ordered. I must not fail to give you a part of a letter which he wrote to his wife the day after the battle, July 22nd. "Yesterday we fought a great battle and gained a great victory, for which all the glory is due to God alone. Though under fire for several hours, I received only one wound, the breaking of the longest finger of the left hand. But the doctor says that it can be saved. My horse was wounded but not killed. My coat got an ugly wound near the hip. While great credit is due to other parts of our gallant army, God made my brigade more instrumental than any other in repulsing the main attack. This is for you alone. Say nothing about it. Let another speak praise, not myself." And he's quoting scripture there from Proverbs. It says, "Let another praise you and not your own lips, a stranger and not your own mouth." But the praise of the Stonewall Brigade was not sung by Jackson alone. Both friend and foe unite in saying that if Jackson had not held the hill, which was the key to the Confederate position, until help came, the Battle of Manassas, or Bull Run, as the Northerners called it, would have been a defeat and not a victory for the South. Jackson's eagle eye saw the place to make a stand, and he held it for 4 hours against all odds. At one time, while his men were lying upon the ground, they were so harassed by the bursting of shells that some of the officers begged to be permitted to advance. "No," said Jackson, "wait for the signal. This place must be held." We do not seek to take glory from other heroes of this wonderful battle, many of whom, as B and Bartow, bravely gave up their lives in the storm of battle, or as Smith and Early made forced marches in order to rescue those so sorely pressed. But we do say that, in one sense, Jackson was the hero of the first Battle of Manassas. In this battle, the Confederates captured 28 cannon with 5,000 muskets and vast stores of articles useful to their needy army. The Confederates lost 369 killed on the field and 1,483 wounded. The road to Washington was now open. There is no doubt that General Washington thought it best to press on while the enemy was routed and take possession of that city. But the commanding generals were afraid to risk the attempt with an army which had been drilled only a few weeks and which had so little discipline, and thus the moment to strike passed by. In a few days the North had chosen a new commander, General MacLeod, who set himself to raise new armies to defend Washington and to scourge the South. Soon after the battle, General Jackson moved his men to a piece of woodland nearby, where he employed the time in drilling his troops. After a time, the Confederate lines were pushed forward to within sight of Washington City, but no battle took place, as General McClellan was too wise to risk another engagement so soon after Manassas. In October, General Jackson was promoted to the rank of Major General and was sent to the Shenandoah Valley to take command of the army which had been fighting in West Virginia. The Stonewall Brigade was left behind with General Johnston. This was a great trial both to General Jackson and to the brigade. When the time came for him to leave for the new field of war, he ordered the brigade to march out under arms, and then rode to their front with his staff. Dr. Dabney says that no cheer arose, for every face was sad. After speaking a few words of praise and love, he threw his bridle reins on the neck of his horse, and stretching his arms toward them, he said, "In the Army of the Shenandoah, you were the 1st Brigade. In the Army of the Potomac, you were the 1st Brigade. In the 2nd Corps of the Army, you are the 1st Brigade. You are the 1st Brigade in the affections of your general, and I hope by your future deeds and bearing you will be handed down to posterity as the 1st Brigade in this, our 2nd War of Independence. Farewell." He then waved his hand and left the grounds at a gallop, followed by the cheers of his brave soldiers. This separation, however, was but for a short time. In November following, the 1st Brigade was ordered to join Jackson at Winchester, and remained with him until the fatal hour at Chancellorsville, when it lost him forever. And there you have it for today, little buddies, a great chapter from a great book. And with that, I must sign off. Look forward to reading to you again very soon. In the meantime, remember, put God first in your life. Be a patriotic American, and honor thy father and thy mother.
Parents, if your kids enjoyed their visit with Uncle Rick, know that they will love the Uncle Rick Audiobook Club. The Uncle Rick Audiobook Club allows access to dozens more stories, both from history and the Bible, to help your kids learn about godly character. Here's what one parent had to say about the book club. "My children love the stories. They make history so interesting. My son says it is because of the details that most textbooks don't include. Uncle Rick is easy to listen to. We love his accents and explanations." Thank you so much for that testimony. If you'd like to learn more about the Uncle Rick Book Club, please join us over at UncleRickAudios.com. That is UncleRickAudios.com. See you there.